Hey, all, and welcome to this week's episode of the Mike Muldoon podcast. Today, bringing another interview. I had a really great conversation with this gentleman today. His name's Efren Delgado. He's a former FBI agent, and he draws on his, his powerful 15 years of field experience. And he also has a master's in psychology. And in his new book, The Opposite is True, he's teaching readers to harness their potential using counterintuitive psychology. This is a great chat. It went on longer than normal, but I felt like it was like talking to a kindred spirit as far as a lot of the same beliefs and philosophies we had. So, and I think if you've been following my podcast for a while, if you've been listening to me, and after this conversation, you're going to see exactly what I mean. So here you go. Here's my interview today with former FBI agent Efren Delgado. Like I was just talking about before, before we start recording here, is one of the things I just liked about, you was the whole about how to conquer your fears. And one of the things was that so many people I think fear of flying, fear of the dark, fear of dark alleys, whatever it is. But a lot of times in life, it's just fear of making a decision, right? It's like fear of leaving a job, fear of leaving a relationship. And I just thought that was really interesting and stuff. And I was looking at it, I was like, oh, well, that probably works for a lot of people. But anyway, so tell me a little bit about yourself, your background.
So, yeah, those are good points on fear because they really hold up our lives where we're supposed to be doing. And I think most people avoid conquering them. Right. So they just kind of default to comfort like we all do. So I'm a former FBI agent. Okay. I spent about 15 years, and a little over 15 years in the FBI. Half of that time was national security, and the other half was in the criminal division, the more traditional, what you think of with the FBI. Before that, my background is psychology, criminology. I grew up in Texas, even though my family is from Southern California, all the West Coast, from Mexico all the way up to Northern California. Right. So we're very much West Coast people, but I grew up in Texas, so I'm the cowboy type who likes to surf. So it's an interesting hybrid there. One of my favorite things about the culture in Texas, though, is just the people are very authentic. Right. I love Californians, and they're not inauthentic, but it's just different. In southern states, I could speak for Texas because I grew up there. Right. They just really, it becomes their default to just try to be genuine and authentic. And you really, that's a good way to grow up. Those foundational values are fantastic. So if somebody has issues or fears or whatever, it's natural for the person to want to help and not stomp on the person with fears. They'd rather lift them up. Right. Well, it's really interesting you say that. So I know what you're talking about. When I lived in California, and I lived in, again, Los Angeles for a long time, I know kind of what you're talking about is the challenge. The interesting thing about people who actually were born and raised in California and, are actually really good people. Like the ones who are like, they're the regulars, like they were born and it's the contingent that moves there. And then of course, let's be honest, when you're in the Los Angeles, it's a very Hollywood area. It's very, so I kind of understand what you're saying. Exactly right. I grew up in New York. It's very authentic there too. It just might be a little abrupt, but New York is very abrupt. Well, I like it. And it's funny. I relate to people like that because I just want to know where I stand. Where do you stand? Where do I stand? Where do we stand? Let's not dance around any of this. So I understand with the whole authentic people. My whole thing is about teaching people, be authentic, be yourself. It's your life. You got to, don't stop wearing the masks, that a lot of times people tend to want to wear because they're worried about just being themselves and how they might be perceived by others. So, but anyway, yes, I get that. Yeah. And blunt is authentic. Right. So you're scraping off all of the cushion. Like, I just want to know where you stand as well. I think Texans are like that. I mean, we're generalizing, obviously. Sure. And yeah, native born Californians, friendliest people. Sometimes I'll have friends or family visit and they interpret that California friendliness as inauthentic. No, that's actually authentic. That's actually, it's kind of animated, I guess. You could describe it that way, the California friendliness. And you're right, like the Hollywood types that from the Midwest, you come here, going to be at movies. they're trying to be what they envision Hollywood as being.
Right.
And that ironically becomes inauthentic. But
right.
In general, yeah, back to the point, I think being blunt and authentic is fantastic. And people often will think, oh, New Yorkers are rude or East Coasters are rude. No, they're being blunt.
They're just being blunt.
And they're respecting your time by 100%. Getting to the point.
I had a buddy of mine who it took him about 20 years to realize, like, if I just don't like being around somebody's company, or so I don't fake it. Like, I'm not rude, but I'll just disengage. I'll just move on. And they'll be like, well, how rude, that's how that you would just not keep talking. So I'm like, it's a waste of time. And it's not, right. I'm not doing them any service by pretending that I want to be in that conversation. Yeah. So it's better off letting them just go off and do what they want to do or who they want to talk to, instead of me just, pretending that, oh yeah, this is so great. This is wonderful. So I'm all about direct. The problem is, and I don't want to get off on a tangent here, but and the younger generation has a harder time with the directness,
Yeah. I have a reason for that. I have a theory for that.
Okay.
But I'm pretty confident in my theory.
All right.
So now we're going to get in the weeds. So I hope your audience doesn't mind jumping into the weeds.
Oh, no, please do.
So to pull back a little bit, the more you pull back, the more perspective you get. So I'll use the analogy of you're looking outside of the ISS, the International Space Station, at Earth.
Right.
You suddenly get a perspective of like who we are. We're more like ants on a big rock.
Right.
And suddenly humility rushes in, and then you gain wisdom. That's what perspective does. So if we pull back on the perspective of time and generations and that sort of thing, you can start to see bigger patterns at play. And what I'm kind of alluding to, the big takeaway of what I'm alluding to is, I think adversity is the catalyst to purpose, action, and success. So let's just keep it simple. Adversity is the catalyst for purpose. So when things are hunky-dory, you're not going to grow.
No.
Because you're not being humbled. And humility is the only path to wisdom. That's a bold statement because I made an absolute, but I stand by it.
Right.
So when everything's fine, when you're doing well, you have no reason to question, to think, to change, to grow. Everything's fine. You're comfortable.
Right.
That warm, fuzzy blanket, I'm great. And I think that's the path of least resistance for humans. We, if we're comfortable, why take the blanket off? So that why is because you want something more. If you want to live beyond mediocrity, if you want to reach that summit, which some of your guests have alluded to as their purpose,
right?
Which I love. I love your podcast, and your guests are always like, "Let's get to the purpose." So I use the metaphor as the summit of the mountain is your life's purpose. It could change, it could evolve, but everybody knows that from the inside. But you can't get to the summit on a chairlift, and you can't get there on a plane. You have to climb the mountain. You have to earn it. And here's the irony: you'll eventually fall on your ass.
Of course,
you'll be humble. You're going to slip. You're going to fall. You're going to scrape yourself, and you'll catch yourself sometimes and just kind of scrape your palms, and then you kind of resume your climb. Eventually, you'll fall. And we have a pastor out here in Southern California, in Riverside. His name is Greg Laurie, and I always quote him. He says, "Fruit grows in valleys and not on mountaintops." So you imagine you fall off the mountain. You're in this puddle of muddy mess because water's on the bottom, not on the top. But that's where all the fruit is. So that's the fruit of wisdom. So you pick up all that fruit, you nourish yourself, you stuff your pockets, look at all the flowers, appreciate those flowers of wisdom. That's where all that growth is. And you embrace it. Don't resent it. You embrace it. So then you resume your climb with a now wiser trajectory so that you could pursue your purpose. So back to the beginning of our conversation, if you look at the hell the World War II generation went through.
Right.
Wars, starvation, feeding their families, no heat, all that hell.
Right.
And they are the greatest generation.
Right.
And if you go back in history, there's probably some pretty great generations that have flown through the history of time without being recorded. Maybe in books, of course, but
sure.
Not like how we remember. Our generation remembers the World War II generation, our grandparents and great-grandparents.
Right.
Mostly great-grandparents. But those people are great because they suffered through adversity and chose to overcome. You don't just sit back and overcome it, you work for
Right.
it. So there's ingrained meaning in survival. I'm going to feed my wife and kids. I'm going to support my husband. I'm going to build this thing to conquer the Nazis in,
Right.
in World War II. So, and you go on and on and on with this demand for survival and ingrained demand for purpose, for meaning. And Viktor Frankl, who was Holocaust survivor,
Yeah.
wrote the book. What was it? Meaning of Life. I'm having a brain cramp. I think it's The Meaning of Life.
I know which book you're talking about.
Yeah, Viktor Frankl. His main thesis is it's meaning, and I agree with him that people need not money, not sex. Like
Right.
Freud would say, sex.
Good relationship with your mother.
Would say money. What's that?
Good relationship with your mother.
Yeah, good. Exactly. And he ties that to sex, of course.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could go with all the theories in the world, but its meaning is what I agree with. I contend that it's meaning, and that comes through not selfishness, but selflessness.
Right.
So the curveball for our generation, yours and mine, and the younger generation especially, what started this seed that I ran off on.
Yeah. Sure. No, it makes sense.
It connects because it's logical and it's not biased. It's just observation of patterns. So our generation, we haven't had to dodge bullets so much. Our bellies have been full. We've had shelter. So what the hell are we going to do for meaning and purpose? We're not having to survive.
Right.
So you can bitch and moan.
Right.
Nobody loves me. Life sucks. Oh, because your latte is lukewarm.
Right.
So you could go on, and I don't want to sound like a grumpy grandpa, but
I get what you're saying here, though. I agree. I have this conversation all the time, real quick, and not to cut you up, then please don't lose your train of thought there. But one thing I say all the time is nothing good comes when you're comfortable, because when you're comfortable, you are complacent. Yeah. And what happens is you will not grow. And the only way you're ever going to maybe grow, make a change, is if you are now forced into some sort of action. You are backed into a corner that there is no other option except you have to fight. And I do agree with you that, we are part of a generation, and that you're right. There hasn't been a lot of that need for struggle. But I also think this is why people start going down the rabbit hole so crazy. And, like I always say, if you have a lot of free time, it's the worst thing you can have in the world, because if you have all your needs met and you're sitting around, I feel like that's when people become crazy, because now you got to start creating things. You got to start creating meaning. You got to start figuring out a way to feel like you're something in this world, whether you're angry at something or this and that. And that's why sometimes I see, people just go down the rabbit hole. So I get 100% what you're saying.
And you said figuring out. Another word for that is thinking. It's a hassle. Thinking is a hassle.
Right.
You and I appreciate, and your audience appreciates thinking. But for most people, it's a hassle. It's so much easier to just be dictated to.
Right.
Just give me an order. I'll do it. Clean your room. Stand in line.
Right.
We're indoctrinated to follow orders. The thinking is not the path of least resistance. It requires some resistance. When you adapt to it, like working out every day, and suddenly working out's not that hard.
Right.
Thinking is the same way. It's easier to just emote. I think I quote Henry Ford also. He said, thinking is the hardest thing there is. That's why so few people do it.
Right.
And I just love that. Back to the current generation we're in, and then the newer generations. We have full bellies. We don't have to scrape to survive. So where does meaning come from? And like you said, now they have to find meaning.
Right.
And what's easy is not usually the right answer. So if you're looking for meaning in silly things, or I care about the environment. Who doesn't care about the environment? I'll go that way.
Right.
Even if it's wrong, your theory, at least I'm caring about something. I'm a good person. So virtue signal, I've got meaning. But pseudo meaning is not the answer. But a lot of people follow that. What's the real answer is typically difficult, which I contend the safety way to know you're on the right path is selflessness.
Right.
But there's selfish benefits to being selfless. And that benefit is fulfillment. It's meaning, it's purpose. And that's really what makes life worth living. And one thing I've been, one sentiment that's just been ingrained in my head just for the last week and a half or so is living. living, true living, not
Right.
existing, but living is
See,
worth dying for.
right. I
Isn't that
say that
beautiful?
it is. It's so funny you
Living
say
is worth
that.
dying for.
Yeah. It's,
That's not, it's gnarly. It's, if you think
yeah.
about it, because that's what the Japanese Bushido culture is like, always remember your death. And then the Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics, back
Right.
then were always saying memento mori, remember your death. And I often tell people to envision yourself on your deathbed. And what do I wish I would have done when I was 50 years old and I was in this situation, or 40 years old and I had a 1-year-old? And so just go back in time.
It's my life right there.
Go into the future is on your deathbed and envision yourself looking back and saying, I wish when I was on that podcast with Efren, as soon as I got up, I went and I hugged my kids one more time, whatever it is,
Sure.
and just go do that. So do that mind travel thing. It's like a reverse engineering of what you want your life to the result to be, and go do that now at whatever age. If you're 50, 60, 30, 20, just start implementing that mindset of like, we're all food for worms. So you might as well truly live and not just exist, which takes effort, but screw it. Just do it.
That's so funny.
It's more fun.
Screw it, just do it. Richard Branson. It's funny you say that. I say that all the time. Life is about live. Most people don't live, they exist. They go through the world, they wake up in the morning, they go to a job, they're in their car, they're not thinking about, they have no direction as far as what they really want to do. They go to the job, they clock in, they do the job, they come home, they eat dinner, do whatever they do, maybe sit on the couch, watch TV, rinse and repeat. Don't even realize it. They're just existing through life. And it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of you've got to be present to realize that that's not how it has to be, and you can make a change. I say that all the time. And that's one of the things I talk about. It's a first principle that I talk about. I do some talking with some youth groups, with some, not youth group, younger people. And my first rule, and I've got 5 of them, but number 1 is life is meant to be lived, and it is your life and you need to live it. And my reason for that is so many people are they don't live their lives. They think they are, but they're being told to how to live it by their parents or they're this. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying go against your parents, but I'm saying at some point in your life, you have to make a choice about what makes you happy. Our parents always want the best for us, but they might have said, Efren, don't be in the FBI, go be an accountant. It's a safe job for you. And, you might have said, oh, I love my parents so much. They're right. I'll go be an accountant. When realistically, your heart was being at the FBI. So, just stuff like that.
Yeah, and for the record, my goal has always been helping people.
Yeah,
and I'll use any tools I need to implement that. And at the time of my career, the FBI I thought was the best tool, so I used that. As a kid, it was something else. As now in the private sector, it's something else.
Right.
So my personal goal, where I get the selfish benefits of selflessness and meaning, is helping people understand human behavior, and particularly understand the bad guys. And here's a big takeaway for the good guys, your audience, my reader, and my audience, is you're stronger than the bad guys. Because the reason they're bad is they don't want to risk vulnerability. They don't want to risk exposure of their weaknesses. So I use the metaphor, they're chihuahuas barking at the doorbell.
Right.
They're so scared of whatever's on the other side is going to see their true nature that they bark like crazy. And humans do that too. They're just loud. So whenever you see really loud behavior without the appropriate context to support it,
right,
I'm so proud, and whatever they're like exclaiming off the rooftops, then why do you have to express it so much?
Oh my God. Listen, I call that out all the time. I'm like, well, let's be honest. You see it on social media all the time. I love my husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, friend so much. They're the most amazing person in the world, blah, 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 blah. And it just goes on and on. And and it's every day. And you're like, oh, that relationship has problems. Because if it's really just there, you don't have to. Like if I did that, I've been with my wife 10 years. Now, if I did it like on her birthday or something, like she'd be like, oh, that's really sweet. If I did it every day, she'd be pissed. She'd be like, stop that. Like we already know that. We don't need to share it with everybody. Yeah, it's disingenuous.
Right.
So I agree with you. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so amazing. No, I don't think you are at all at that point. I don't think that's that.
Context always matters.
Right.
And that's one of the first principles that when I start out my book is there's 2 phenomenons. You always have to consider context.
Right.
And secondly, you always have to consider continuum. most things aren't binary, black and white. Some things are.
Right.
But if you're talking about fear, for example, you're probably not, you don't have a phobia, an extreme irrational fear. Maybe you just have a natural fear of public speaking or sharks or whatever the natural fears are. If you have an irrational fear, just to illustrate what phobia means, is I fear buttons.
Right.
There's nothing really to fear with that. There's some neurosis going on. So there's ways to overcome that. I'm not a therapist or anything.
Right. I understand.
But that's phobia is not what we're talking about. But phobias are one extreme of a bell curve. And the other extreme would be I fear nothing, which is another extreme, which you're probably a psychopath if you don't fear anything, because fear is a natural human thing. So most of us are in the fat part of the middle. The same goes for good and evil. Most of us aren't Hitler, and most of us aren't Mother Teresa. We're in the fat middle. So continuum is one thing to consider always, in addition to context in whatever you're talking about. And the reason I point that out in the book is because so many people have conversations, write books, make movies or whatever, and they don't take into account in their arguments or their theories continuum and context, and they're very relevant.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody's rushing up a hill and starts shooting everybody, but you're in war and you're protecting your platoon.
Right.
Totally appropriate.
Totally appropriate.
But if you're at a Vegas concert and that happens,
right,
you're an active shooter.
Right.
Context. And so when you described some of your friends or the social media activity you saw, and you're predicting, okay, that person doesn't have a healthy relationship. That's,
no, most of the time I know they don't have one.
Well, there you go. But you saw the tells that I referred to in the book, and you simply thought about it logically. People think like, I wasn't ever a criminal profiler. I work with those guys sometimes. Right. But people think they're like psychic, but they're using logic. And they're using patterns.
Right.
If you analyze every chef in the world, they probably have similar patterns in their childhood and their adulthood and experiences. So they became a chef. If you're a serial killer in extreme behavior, I guarantee you'll see similar patterns in serial killer behavior. And the same is true for good guys, bad guys, bankers, podcasters, similar things. So I guess the big picture is, if your audience could just identify what their purpose is honestly and objectively, they could start to prioritize what those things are. And chances are, if they're the good guys, that there's some level of selflessness there.
Right.
And they'll find fulfillment. And if they were to have the courage to kind of resist our natural tendency, mine too, to be comfortable, you could start to slowly fast for food and slowly turn off you don't have to watch the next 3 shows of the Netflix show. Get a little uncomfortable, turn on the lamp and read for 10 minutes or exercise for 15 minutes, or do whatever you need to do to start implementing that purpose that they're thinking about right now as they listen to us.
Right.
They're like, damn, I need to do that. So just do it. You could turn the 180 ship. Every minute that passes, you could turn your life around completely.
Right.
And that's the choice you're talking about. But that's scary.
Right. Well, it's funny again, and in my I've talked about this quite a bit in the past.
Yeah.
Is again, I think a lot of times people look at their lives and go, I can't make a change now. And I often use a speedboat. I go, if you're in your 20s, you're single, you don't have, any responsibilities, you're living in your parents' basement and you want to try something and it doesn't work out, you're a speedboat. You're zipping across, you go, I'm going to go this way. You can zip it around and go right back. You can just, I tell all young people, fail as many times in the world. Don't worry about being perfect. Just go. And if you fail, you can do it. As you get older, myself, I'm married, got kids and all that. It gets a little bit, I can't just keep, zipping around.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I can't change my life. But instead, I'm not a speedboat. I'm a cargo ship. I got a lot with me. Now those changes can happen and I can get to the life I want to get. It's just going to be a little bit longer. It's going to take a little bit more of a thing, but I shouldn't give up, and you shouldn't give up making a change if you're unhappy just because you are that. And I tell people that all the time. It just may take you a little bit longer, but it's still possible.
You always have to consider the context, and your context is you're responsible for other human beings.
Right.
So it would be selfish of you to just run off and like, I want to sail around the world. Well, you're not going to abandon your family to do it.
Right.
And like I said, like that sounds like I'm going to truly live life. So I'm going to go walk the earth.
Right.
Like Cain or whatever. But if you think about it, that's a very selfish thing. If I just wanted to be selfish and enjoy life, I would move to Costa Rica, surf every day, and eat great food.
Right.
But I wouldn't serve anybody. I'd just be surfing and eating food. That's so selfish, and that's a pathetic life.
Right.
As fun as that would be, fun is not the secret to a fulfilling life. Neither is happiness. Happiness is a byproduct, in my opinion, of living out your purpose. Right. And your purpose evolves, but I guarantee it's tied to some level. The true purpose is tied to some level of serving others and acknowledging a higher power and being humble. Those are all paths to wisdom. Humility is the only path to wisdom, and there's ways to access humility without the world humbling you with a front-on collision and you break your clavicle and your femur bone, or you're diagnosed with cancer, you get divorced. Those are ways where you're humbled. But there's proactive ways to be humbled where you don't have to suffer those terrible consequences, hopefully. And that's acknowledging a higher power. I'm a Christian, so I acknowledge Jesus Christ and the Holy Trinity. But simply acknowledging a higher power is already humbling, because you acknowledge a lot of logical things that the world tells you is illogical. And, the classic example, well, not to go all into a religious path, but it's illogical to think that our perfect planet, the way it's created, with gravity, with density, with humidity, with hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, all those things perfectly, if they were different, life couldn't be sustained on Earth, but just by a little bit. And every computer code of software needed a designer to come up with that complex thing. And we see DNA has those bases and everything's very complex and it has to be in a certain way. You need an intelligent designer. It doesn't happen randomly. It's mathematically illogical to think that a lot of these things could happen just by millions of years of chance. It's just illogical. Right. So that's part of the blunt objectivity of scraping off all of the delusions of comfort. Like if it's more comfortable to acknowledge or to think that everything selfish that you're doing in your life is the right path, and because you're with groupthink, everybody's doing the same thing together, doesn't make it true. It just makes it comfortable. Right, exactly. So if you get out of your comfort zone, rip off that warm blanket, experience some of the frost of reality, cold plunge, if you will. Right. That kind of adversity of reality, of cold plunge, of fasting, of ripping muscle to get stronger, all those adversities are pointing to one thing: truth. And if you really want to live beyond mediocrity, embrace truth. Even when you're the painful part of looking at yourselves, I'll release a lot of stress that your audience might be squirming in their seat because they're thinking about their flaws, their imperfections. But I'm as imperfect as anybody out there. Sure. Yeah. Probably more so. And the difference is I'm acknowledging those imperfections, those failures, those weaknesses, those selfish behaviors, and I'm moving forward from them. I'm not attacking myself or judging everybody else for theirs. Right. I'm just suggesting to live your life completely. Just forgive yourself, forgive others, and go for it. You have one chance. We're all going to die. Go for it. Right. Don't listen to your mother. Don't listen to your brother. Don't listen to your frat friends or whoever's telling you, oh, you think you're better than us. Don't do that. There it is. Don't listen to them. So the other thing I talk about a lot. Exactly. Is the lions to lambs. You got to be willing to be a lion. And I would say the lion has nothing to do with masculinity. It has nothing to do. You could take the shyest, meekest little kid and he's the lion, and you could take the jock and he's the lamb, because a lot of times it's a willingness to go about it alone. And I have an athletic background. So I played high school sports. I played college sports. And, wow. And it was always interesting watching, the young little, let's call, what we were in the 80s, a little nerdy kid all by himself, but he was doing his own thing. He was going about his own life. That kid is really the lion. Whereas like if some guys on my football team all of a sudden decide, oh, you know what, if they want to go try out for the theater club or something like that, they may have been ostracized and they may have said, oh, you know what, I'm not going to do it. I'm just kidding. And that's that lamb mentality. It's a herded mentality. So I always say it's important in your life that you have to be willing to be a lion. And again, has nothing to do with physical strength. It's just the willingness, the courage to go about it alone and live your life to the truest sense. Great point. And here's the rub. It's the more difficult path,
Of course it is.
but it's also the more fun path and the more fruitful path.
You're right. It's because again, most people, like you said it earlier, oh, you think you're better than us, right? Most people don't have the strength or the courage to make a change in their lives. And the minute they see somebody near them, you see a lot of times it's a relationship, right? Two heavy set husband and wife, and one decides to get into fitness and really works out, and suddenly, the relationship breaks apart. Oh, you either they've made that person feel more uncomfortable, or they've just realized they have different needs or whatever it is. Or, or again, you think you're better than me, or you're change. People don't like other people to change, and they want to keep them. They want to keep them.
Right.
And you can't let them do it. And it'll cost you friendships, might cost you jobs, it might cost you a lot of things. But I always feel like you will come out better for it, for at least going on it on your own. Now, I don't say
in the long run.
I don't believe that every goal you go after, like I'm a big New York Jets fan, no matter how much work I put in now, and I hit I'm only a few years older than Aaron Rodgers, but I'm never getting there. Like, no matter how much, like, I don't believe that everything you chase after you'll achieve, but I do believe everything you chase after with gusto, you may not achieve, but you will be better for it. And there's a pretty good chance you will find something else from it, which actually might have been the thing you were meant to be doing all along.
I agree with that. Yeah. And one of the prerequisites to success in the big picture is failure.
Right.
So you just go for things, allow yourself to fail, embrace failure, because you're learning. The failure is a form of being humbled. So you might as well, pick up all that fruit of wisdom, and when you're humbled, and then update your trajectory.
And it's not just that, like, so, with failure, I always tell people failure is where you write your story. Nobody ever gets on stage at a TED Talk or something like that and says, J.K. Rowling doesn't get up there and go, okay, so last year I made $1.5 billion. My movies do all this. No, she talks about being homeless, raising her kid, writing books, telling stories. That's what I always tell you in failure, or everybody talks about the journey. Bill Gates doesn't get up there and talk about he's worth billions and billions of dollars right now. He talks about Microsoft in a garage, or however, you know what I mean? Like, and failures where, so everybody wants a story, but nobody really wants to go through it. But I always tell people when you're having a hard time, you're in your story. This is what you're going to talk about someday. Yes. You're going to talk about your failures. You're going to talk about the money you lost. You're going to talk about
the struggle.
And then you'll be like, yeah, but now I'm here. Yeah. But your whole talk, your 60-minute talk is going to be 58 minutes about how you got here, and only 2 minutes of I'm here.
A good metaphor you made me think about that I tossed in the book. You mind me giving you a parable real quick?
No, of course. No.
So there was a kid who found a caterpillar, and he was stoked on the caterpillar. He put it in a jar. His mom put a stick in there with a leaf. And every day he would just kind of wake up and meet his little friend caterpillar. Right. Then one day, it was starting to form like a cocoon. The kid's freaking out. Mom, what's going on? That's okay. This caterpillar is one day going to change. It's, doing its thing in the cocoon. Oh, great. I'm so excited. So every day he would check it. Mom, are you sure it's okay? Eventually the day came where it started to see the little aperture opening up on one end. Mom, it's coming. So he's waiting for this caterpillar to come out to emerge to become a butterfly. So the kid was so anxious. He's like, look, he's having trouble, Mom. I'm going to help him. So he grabbed scissors and he cut kind of the edges to help it out. And it helped. It was great. He's so excited. It's working. It's coming out. And the caterpillar came out, but he didn't look like a butterfly. He looked like this globby thing with wet. They weren't even wings. They were just like something. Mom, son, it's okay. Maybe it'll dry out, whatever. He gave it some time. It wasn't changing. They took it to a local professor, a science biology professor at the local university, and they explained they needed the struggle to squeeze the juices inside into the wings so that they could expand and become a butterfly. That sad caterpillar never became a butterfly because it took the easy way. I mean, not on purpose. Right. But going the easy route does not get you to the summit. It's the struggle that makes us who we are. And I love that metaphor because you just get these visions of these beautiful butterflies out there. And each one of those beautiful butterflies went through that painful struggle. And who knows what in their caterpillar minds, what they were thinking during the struggle. This is never going to work. Life is horrible.
Right.
Why me? Why? All the things you and I think about when we're struggling.
Right.
Is this ever going to work? Oh, you would just think of all the things your listeners are driving right now going, yeah, I'm never going to, you're going to make it. You have to squeeze through that struggle and you will become that butterfly. And it's okay to be flowery. I love Dead Poet Society. Do you ever see
I
that?
love it, man. Yeah. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Get on the desk. Got to see things from a different angle. Love it.
And if you have high school kids, I think from high school until like your elderly years, you could watch that movie and get something out of it.
Right.
But it's really living life. And then they show an example, unfortunately. I mean, I think it's fortunate, but it's sad. An example of somebody who gives in to the pressure of their family or friends, or everybody's telling you don't fulfill your path. And then you're not, existing and then dying. That's not life. You have to live and you have to struggle to really find your purpose, and it's worth it.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you on that one. Yeah, that's actually a really good movie. I always think about that scene when you put him on the desk, different perspectives, looking at different things. Great movie. Yes. Great actor too. Miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too.
So let me ask you something real quick. So psychology, is that what got you to the FBI? Was that it? Was it because of your background?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think you have to be an accountant or an attorney or a particular trade to join the FBI, and they're looking for just people with a certain degree and applicable work experience. And then you have to go through a background check.
Right.
If you're a drug user or a criminal, you can't ever do it. Sure. But if you have the basics, you could get in there. But most people don't make it through because they have mistakes they made when they were young or not applicable work experience, and there's high competition. So I just happened to be a psychology guy, and I knew I never wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I like helping people, but I don't think I have the patience to listen to people's problems and them not solving the problems. I like to apply and fix problems.
Right.
So that's a little tough in my dating now married life, because I like to fix problems. I can't just listen to them go over and over. I want to help.
And all they want you to do is listen. My wife says all the time, I don't need you to fix it. Just listen. Yeah. And I'm like, but I want to fix it.
I fit that guy stereotype where I want to help you with your problem and not just listen to it.
Right.
But I'm trying to get better at that.
So let me ask you, so we were talking earlier about, some techniques to overcome fear. I mean, so how would you highlight some of those? Like we just talked about, just look at your past and look at your future and kind of envision what your life would be if you didn't do it. I mean, what would be some of those techniques?
So the answer is simple, not easy.
Okay.
But it is simple. And before I was referring to sharks and snakes and terrorists and all these scary things, public speaking. People fear death in public speaking, I think, more than anything.
See, I don't mind public speaking. You can put me up anywhere. Death, yeah, a little bit.
Right. And so who fears public speaking the least?
Who?
Those who speak in the public.
Oh, really? Yeah.
So who fears snakes the least? Like snake handlers.
Right.
Who fears sharks the least? Surfers, marine biologists. So what's the pattern we're seeing here? Who fears hosting a podcast the least? Podcasters.
Podcast, right.
So
meaning if you're doing it, you just
and what does that mean? You're learning. So I contend, and I have a whole chapter on this, is we fear the unknown.
Right.
Only.
Always.
If you learn about, like I spent my life investigating and capturing and hurting criminals from hurting other people. Like that's my thing. I hate predators, especially against the innocent, and nobody's more innocent than children.
Oh, you made my blood boil. Like any thought. Oh, yeah.
Right. So I still help with some NGO, a non-government organization, people against trafficking, human trafficking, particularly for kids. But my point is, as scary as those demons are, the more you learn about them, the less scary they are, because you learn that they're chihuahuas barking at the doorbell, that sort of thing. You learn their frailties, their weaknesses. And instead of internally working on themselves, humbling themselves, and overcoming their own issues, they end up. This is the nature of the demon, of the evil person. They are jealous, envious of the good guys, just like the devil was envious of God. The evil in general, bad guys, criminals, bullies, tyrants, oppressors, tyrants, they have one thing in common: jealousy, envy of the good guys. So what do they choose to do? Because it's all choice, free will.
Right, of course.
What do they choose to do? They don't choose to help, to assist, to humble. They fear all those things. But the fact that Mike, your audience, Mother Teresa, the good people in the world, maybe they don't even realize it, but they're making themselves vulnerable every time they choose to be nice instead of mean. Every time they choose to lift instead of pull down. They are being brave by making themselves humble and vulnerable to be a good guy. The good guys make themselves vulnerable and humble. But sorry, I had somebody come. And the bad guys are too scared to do that. So that jealousy makes them fear more. They don't get better at overcoming their fears. They get worse at it. So they double down. And what do they do with the people they're envious of? They pull them down.
Right.
Like, oh, you think it starts out with, oh, you think you're better than us. Hey, who else is with me? Paco thinks he's better than us.
Right.
Or let's bring it down, make it more real. In Black American culture, oh, Johnny's trying to be white.
Right.
No, I'm with you guys. Give me the gun. I'll do the game. Whatever the problem is, I'm Mexican. So like a lot of the Mexican culture says, oh, ¿qué te crees? Who do you think you are?
Right.
Well, who I think I am is somebody worth a lot more than, I'm not just going to be a landscaper. I'm not just going to do X, Y, and Z stereotype. So you have to rebel from the cultures you're stuck in, the families that you're stuck in, and this delusion of loyalty for these unhealthy things. There's a lot of domestic violence victims that think
like
they don't.
1 in 4, right? Something like that. My wife said the number was pretty high. She was talking about
that sounds high, but psychologically, they don't think they deserve better because they've been told since childhood.
Right.
Their comfort zone is, you're not good enough. You deserve to be abused. You deserve to be neglected.
They're hardwired.
But you get comfortable with shit.
Right.
And that's not what life's about. So unfortunately, when your comfort zone is unhealthy, you're in a gang, a bad neighborhood, an unhealthy family dynamic, you have to rebel even more than people who grow up in a relatively normal, quote unquote, normal lifestyle.
My parents, I was pretty fortunate enough. My dad passed away a few months ago, but I was raised in a pretty cool household. And my parents were just like, hey, just don't go out and hurt anybody in the world, and feel free to do what you want to do. You know what I mean? Like, just go out there. They
gave you permission.
Hard parents. They gave me permission. I didn't have to rebel or break away. It was easier for me, but you're right. Some people who come from very overbearing families or extended families, where they're going to be constantly, oh, how do you think you're better than us? Or you're trying to get away from this, or why do you think of this? Or you're going to college, and and all that. It's a harder pull. And sometimes you have to cut people off completely.
Well, you oftentimes have to cut people off completely. Here's the thing. Most people live in mediocrity because it's the path of least resistance. So just like gravity, works, you have to you have to fight gravity just to stand. We're adapted to it,
right?
But we're fighting gravity all the time. Astronauts who spend time at the ISS, the International Space Station, they literally atrophy despite trying to compensate it with exercise. So when they come back to Earth, their skeletal structure is less dense, their muscles are more fatigued, so they have to reacclimate to standing, walking, everything that we take for granted,
right?
Because we have gravity. So every time humans don't work on their inner issues and don't humble themselves and don't live in reality, they're atrophying being able to manage reality, being able to manage obstacles, being able to manage these dynamics that we're talking about. So you're getting out of shape for living a real life. You're getting out of shape for it. And when you're out of shape, what's easier, pick up a donut or start working out?
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of how I'm just as human as anybody else. They have these at work today. I grabbed one. I ate the donut already. This is a cookie I'm trying to not eat. So the point is, we're all human.
Yeah.
I shouldn't eat that, and I should work out today.
Or do both.
I've been on a lazy streak. Yeah, or do both. The point is balance. But we all go through seasons of I'm in a zone, and we go through seasons of you get a cold and suddenly you're out of shape because you had a cold for a couple of weeks.
Right.
So that, life is filled with obstacles. So I'm not going to throw in the towel. I'm never going to work out again because it's going to be harder the next time. I'm going to do it.
Right.
And I'm going to feel good the second I do it. So I just I don't want to come off as like a preachy person.
I get it.
I'm just saying it how it is.
The thing is, it's really sad too when you see, and especially sometimes you see it in younger people who've just kind of given up, whether they've given up with health or they just seem to have given up on life, and they just have that glaze over of this is all it is and this is all it'll ever be, and that cycle that people get caught in, like, well, this is just it, this is my life, and like, no, you can make a change, and some, maybe they do eventually, it clicks and they go off and they make changes, but some it's just
right, and
then it's a whole other generation behind them. Right. Suddenly you start looking at their kids and you're like, oh yeah, I can see where this is going unless somebody steps in, somebody can step in and change this course. I know where this is going. So
we could give your audience permission that they don't have to fix themselves in one day. Just do something today.
Right.
Do something tomorrow. Do something the next day. And you'll naturally build. Don't overburden yourself with like, I'm suddenly going to have this diet and this workout schedule and solve the world's problems and write that book. Baby steps. Man. Have a North Star view of like where your summit, where you want to go. Chop it up into manageable bites. You can't eat the elephant all at once. You eat it one bite at a time. So chop it up and then just start and do a little bit and reward yourself for doing that little bit.
I had a buddy. I'm sorry to cut you off there, Efren, but you just made me remember the story. Again, I had a buddy of mine. He'd always be like, all right, tomorrow I'm going to start running 5 miles. I'm going to quit smoking. I'm going to go to the gym every day and I'm going to hike. And I'd be like, why don't you just start by cleaning your apartment? Like, you know what I mean? Like you're that's not sustainable. You're not gonna sustain that. And I say clean apartment because I have this thing about people. Like if you go in their home and their house is messy and their car is messy, messy brain. And if you can't see that, if that is chaos, and apparently you're just comfortable living in chaos, and it's probably chaos in the brain. And he's actually went on and changed his life quite a bit. But it was just interesting at the time. He'd always be like, dude, just clean your apartment. You might realize that'll clean your brain out a little bit. You might find the motivation to do this. Like me, I was, like I said, I was an athlete, but when I got out of college and I was living in Los Angeles and I was an artist and all that, and smoking and doing all that other stuff. And when I finally came around to quitting, the first thing I did was I found the new hobby, which was playing volleyball. And from that became one little step to then working out, to doing this and that. And now it's 20 something years later and I've never had a cigarette again. So you sometimes it's just a little step.
Yeah. You enjoyed the volleyball.
I enjoyed the volleyball.
So cheat. These are hacks. Do something you enjoy that doesn't hurt you.
Right.
It's okay to cheat in the sense of like, you don't have to be a saint overnight. You just have to be a little bit better. So don't eat the donut, do the workout, whatever the situation may be, just take the next step. And so I might have gone off on a tangent. Back to answer your question, we fear the unknown.
Right.
So the answer to that is exposure. Like expose yourself either baby step or whatever to learning about that thing you're afraid of. So learning about it, knowledge. The second one is experience it. Learn about elevators and then step into an elevator without going up or down with keeping the door open. And then doing those two things. And then the third thing is repeat. Just practice, do it more. I had this fear of heights, which is a pretty normal fear when I was a little kid.
Right.
And I hated the fear more than I did the heights. So I jumped off the bed, then I jumped off the fence. And I think a couple of times I jumped off the roof of my house. I climbed the roof, but I hated the being scared.
Right.
So I knew kind of naturally in a little kid mind, like the only way to get over it is to do it, learn about it. So I talked about the shark, snakes, terrorists, criminals. The more you learn about whatever you fear, the less scary it'll be, because you'll pull back the curtain of the Wizard of Oz and you'll see this little old twerp.
Right.
You'll open the front door and you'll reveal the Chihuahua on the other side that's been yapping. Meanwhile, that German Shepherd is asleep, passed out in the living room, because he knows he could get up, eat the bad guy, go back to sleep with a full belly, no problem. That's why he's not barking. In reality, dogs bark, but you get the metaphor.
Right, right. Oh man, this was great, man. I'm sorry. I think I kept you quite a bit, man. I really appreciate though. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
Looks like you and I have a lot of the same thoughts around things, probably because we're the same generation too. But it was awesome, man. It was really cool talking to you, and I appreciate it. And is the book out, or is the book, are you in the process?
It is out. It came out in September, because a lot of these truths are counterintuitive and paradoxical. I titled it "The Opposite is True."
The opposite is true. Okay. Yeah. And where can people find? Did you have a website?
I do have a website. It's efrendelgado.com. And my first name spelled EFREN Delgado.
Okay. Got it. Excellent. Well, listen, man, I just want to say thanks so much for coming on and appreciate it. I'm sure my listeners are going to get a lot from this. All right.
I appreciate it too. Have a great day.
All right, buddy. Thank you.